Welcome to the Forge Over 40 podcast. My name is Steve Didier, and this show is for high performers who refuse to let their edge quietly erode. If you've built companies, led teams, carried responsibility for decades, but lately your focus feels duller, decisions feel heavier, and your mental stamina isn't quite what it used to be, this is where we rebuild the biological systems that your leadership depends on, and we do it on a physiological level. So, let's talk about something that a lot of high achievers notice once they move into their 40s. Recovery changes, not just from your workouts, but from everything across the board. You travel for work and it takes a lot longer to feel normal again. A hard week of meetings and decisions leaves you just a little bit more drained than it used to. Sleep helps, but it doesn't fully reset the system the way it once did. You push through a stressful stretch, and instead of bouncing back quickly, the fatigue lingers. And eventually, a quiet thought starts showing up in the back of your head. Maybe I'm just getting older. That explanation is convenient, but it's also incomplete. Yes, of course, our biology changes as we age, but what most high performers experience is not simply aging. It's stacking stress load that the recovery systems of the body are no longer keeping up with. And the people most vulnerable to this are the exact people who pride themselves on discipline. The ones who push hard, the ones who train hard, the ones who work long hours, who carry serious responsibility. Because here's the uncomfortable reality. Many high achievers run their physiology in the same way they run their business. They keep adding load. They rarely upgrade the recovery systems that support that load. Let me explain what I mean. Your body has a finite capacity to recover from stress. Stress is not just emotional pressure. It includes things like work stress, cognitive load, training stress, travel, sleep disruption, and alcohol, inflammation, and metabolic instability. Every single one of those factors draws from the same pool of recovery resources. And for most high performers, those stressors don't exist in isolation. They stack. A typical week might look like this. You train hard Monday morning. You handle a full day of work decisions. You stay mentally engaged for 10 or 12 hours. Maybe you grab drinks with a client that evening. Sleep is a little shorter than ideal. Tuesday starts again early, more decisions, more meetings, another workout squeezed in. And you get travel later in the week. By Thursday, you're still pushing, but by Friday, you're noticeably more fatigued than you used to be. But because you're disciplined, you push through. The problem is that the body does not care how disciplined you are. It responds to physiology. When stressors stack faster than recovery systems adapt, the result is a slow decline in resilience. Not a dramatic collapse, not anything crazy, just slower bounce back, longer soreness, more fatigue, less sharpness. Now, here's where the hard mirror comes in. Many high performers make this worse without realizing it. They continue training like they did in their 30s or their 20s. Hard sessions, high intensity, minimal recovery days. But because mentally they still operate in that same way as they did, push harder, work harder, train harder. But the physiological context has changed. In your 30s, recovery capacity is naturally higher. Hormonal signaling is stronger, mitochondrial efficiency is high, sleep architecture tends to be a little more forgiving. The system can absorb a lot of stress without noticeable consequences. After 40, however, that buffer becomes smaller. Testosterone may begin trending downward, thyroid conversion can become less efficient while under chronic stress, your cortisol rhythms flatten, mitochondrial efficiency gradually declines when sleep, nutrition, and metabolic stability drift. None of this means the body suddenly stopped working, but it does mean that the margin for error shrinks. The same stress load that felt manageable at 35 can overwhelm the system at 45 if nothing about recovery or strategy changes. And that's where a mistake happens. Instead of adjusting the recovery strategy, most high achievers double down on intensity. They push harder in the gym. They drink more caffeine to push through fatigue. They compress sleep during busy weeks, and they assume The lingering exhaustion is simply the price of ambition. But physiology doesn't negotiate, it adapts. If stress input stays high and recovery signals stay weak, the system gradually shifts towards survival mode. Energy production becomes much more conservative. Inflammation starts to rise, hormonal signaling becomes less efficient, and the nervous system remains in a heightened alert state for much longer periods of time. Your recovery slows. The body becomes incredibly good at keeping you functional. You can still work, you can still train, you can still lead, but that feeling of resilience that you had a decade ago, that begins to fade. Now, here's something really important. Recovery capacity is not fixed. It can absolutely be rebuilt, but rebuilding it requires understanding the systems that actually produce the energy. And most people, they aim at the wrong target. They try and fix recovery by adding more supplements, more gadgets, more hacks, but those things sit far downstream from the systems that actually determine how resilient your physiology really is. Recovery is driven upstream by mitochondria, by metabolism, by nervous system regulation, and by hormone signaling. When those systems are stable, the body absorbs stress remarkably well. When they're unstable, even moderate stress begins to feel overwhelming. So the real question then isn't why recovery declines after 40. The real question is whether the systems that support recovery have kept up with the stress load that you're asking your body to handle. And for many high achievers, the honest answer is no. Next, I want to dig a little bit deeper into the metabolic and mitochondrial side of recovery, because the real engine behind resilience isn't motivation. It's cellular energy production. And when that engine starts losing efficiency, every single form of stress suddenly becomes harder to bounce back from. So let's go one level deeper, because the real engine behind recovery isn't willpower, it is energy production. Every system that allows you to recover from stress, your muscles, your brain, your immune system, even your hormones, depends on the body's ability to generate usable cellular energy. And that energy comes from structures inside your cell called mitochondria. Mitochondria are essentially the power plants of the body. Their job is to convert nutrients and oxygen into ATP, which is the molecule your cells actually spend to do work. Every heartbeat, every muscle contraction, every neural signal in your brain, every repair process that happens while you sleep, all of it requires ATP. When the mitochondrial function is strong, the body produces energy efficiently. Stress is absorbed. Workouts feel productive instead of draining. Mental performance stays stable even during demanding weeks. But when mitochondrial efficiency starts to drift, recovery slows down across the board. You feel it in very subtle ways at first. You finish a workout and the soreness hangs around longer. Travel fatigue takes an extra day or two to clear. Mentally demanding days feel heavier than they used to. And the key point here is that the workload may not have changed at all. Your schedule might look similar to what it did 10 years ago, but the biological energy or the biological engine producing the energy needed to handle that workload has become slightly less efficient. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually as certain inputs accumulate over time. Chronic stress is one of the biggest drivers. When stress is persistent, cortisol levels remain elevated more often than they should. Cortisol is incredibly useful in short bursts because it mobilizes energy quickly. But when it stays elevated too frequently, it creates a different metabolic environment. Inflammation increases, insulin sensitivity can begin drifting, sleep depth becomes less consistent, and those factors slowly affect mitochondrial efficiency. The cells still produce energy, but they do it less efficiently. Now, we add sleep disruption to that picture. Deep sleep is when many of the body's repair systems operate at full capacity. Hormonal signals reset, inflammation gets cleared, cellular repair accelerates. So if sleep becomes lighter or fragmented, those repair processes lose their effectiveness. You still function, but the cellular machinery that maintains high energy output doesn't get serviced every night. Over time, that leads to a small decline in energy efficiency. Nutrition plays a role here too. Your mitochondria rely on a steady supply of nutrients to generate ATP efficiently. When fueling patterns become erratic, skipping meals, relying heavily on caffeine, or undereating earlier in the day, the metabolic signals that regulate energy production become unstable. Your body compensates by leaning more heavily on stress hormones to keep you moving. And again, that works in the short term. But over time, it slowly shifts the internal environment toward energy conservation instead of energy abundance. Now, combine all of these inputs: high cognitive load, frequent travel, sleep disruption, caffeine dependence, underfueling, alcohol in the evenings. None of these things individually will destroy your recovery. But when they stack together week after week, they gradually reduce the efficiency of the system that generates cellular energy. And when cellular energy production declines, recovery from every form of stress becomes lower. That's why so many high achievers describe a similar experience once they move into their 40s. They're still disciplined, still working hard, still training in the gym, but the same effort produces more fatigue than it used to. This is not a motivation issue. It is an energy production issue. Your body simply has fewer biological resources available to absorb the same stress load. There's another important factor tied to mitochondrial health that often gets overlooked: muscle mass. Muscle tissue is not just about strength or aesthetics. It plays a very critical role in metabolic health and energy regulation. Muscle acts as one of the body's largest metabolic reservoirs. It stores glycogen, helps regulate glucose, and supports overall energy stability. As muscle mass gradually declines, which happens naturally if resistance training isn't consistent, metabolic efficiency declines along with it. That means glucose handling becomes less smooth, energy production becomes slightly less stable, and fatigue accumulates more quickly during demanding weeks. Many high performers unintentionally accelerate this process. Busy schedules reduce their training frequency. Recovery time between workouts shrink. Stress hormones stay elevated. Sleep quality fluctuates. All of those inputs slowly chip away at the systems that maintain mitochondrial efficiency. The result is exactly what many people experience. Recovery slows. Fatigue lingers. The body feels less resilient. And the mistake that most people make at this point is trying to compensate with more stimulation, more caffeine, harder workouts, more productivity pressure. But pushing harder on a system that is already energy constrained only deepens the imbalance. It's like trying to run a company faster while the power grid supplying the building is becoming unstable. The solution here isn't pushing employees harder. The solution is stabilizing the power supply. And that's exactly what rebuilding mitochondrial and metabolic stability does for your physiology. When cellular energy production improves, recovery improves. When recovery improves, resilience returns. Work stress becomes a lot easier to absorb. Workouts feel productive again instead of draining. Mental sharpness returns earlier in the day, and the body begins to behave more like the system you remember from 10 years ago. In this final bit, we're going to talk about high achievers actually rebuild that recovery capacity, because the answer isn't extreme protocols or complicated biohacking routines. It's restoring physiological hierarchy that allows the body to produce and manage energy the way it was designed to. So now the real question becomes this: if recovery capacity declines because the systems that produce and regulate energy have declined, how do you rebuild it? Well, it's not with hacks, it's not with stimulants, and it's not with the kind of biohacking circus that tells you the answer is another gadget or another extreme protocol. Recovery capacity is rebuilt by restoring the hierarchy of physiology that your body actually runs on. Mitochondria, metabolism, nervous system, hormones. Everything else follows those systems. When they're stable, recovery becomes dramatically more efficient. When they're unstable, no supplement stack in the world will fully compensate. Let's start with the most overlooked piece of recovery. That is energy input. A lot of high achievers unknowingly operate in a mild energy deficit during the day. Coffee replaces breakfast. Lunch gets pushed back because meetings stack up. The first substantial meal Generally happens late in the afternoon or evening. From a productivity standpoint, that can feel very efficient. From a metabolic standpoint, it creates a problem. Your brain is running one of the most energy-demanding operating systems in the body. Decision-making, problem-solving, strategic thinking, all of it consumes fuel. If fuel availability is inconsistent, the body compensates by leaning on stress hormones to maintain blood sugar and keep the brain functioning. That works in the short term, but it pushes the system into a stress-driven energy pattern instead of a metabolically stable one. Rebuilding recovery capacity often starts with something simple. Consistent fueling earlier in the day. Protein intake right away in the morning. Balanced meals that stabilize blood glucose instead of creating large spikes and drops. That change alone removes a huge amount of hidden stress from the metabolic system. Next up, sleep architecture. Most high performers know that sleep matters. What many don't realize is how sensitive recovery is to sleep depth. Deep sleep is when growth hormone pulses most strongly. It's when tissues repair. It's when inflammation clears. It's when the brain resets many of the neurochemical signals that regulate energy and mood. So, if deep sleep becomes fragmented from late caffeine, alcohol, excessive screen exposure, or chronic nervous system activation, the repair process becomes incomplete. You still sleep, but the biological maintenance that should occur during sleep loses efficiency. Improving sleep depth doesn't require perfection. It requires consistency. Consistent wake times, morning light exposure, reducing stimulation late at night so that the nervous system can downshift properly. These signals help restore circadian rhythm that governs hormonal repair during sleep. Then we come to training. Exercise is one of the most powerful tools for improving mitochondrial function and metabolic stability, but training stress has to match recovery capacity. This is where many driven individuals get themselves into trouble. They continue training like they're 25 years old. High intensity sessions, minimal recovery days, constant pushing. The discipline that built their success becomes the thing that quietly drives fatigue. After 40, training should still be challenging, of course, but it should also be strategic. Resistance training to maintain muscle mass, moderate cardiovascular work to improve your mitochondrial efficiency, and recovery days that allow the nervous system to reset. When training aligns with recovery capacity instead of constantly exceeding it, the body adapts much more effectively. Energy production improves instead of declining. Now, let's talk about the nervous system. This is the control center that determines whether the body operates in performance mode or recovery mode. High achievers spend most of their day in sympathetic activation, alert, focused, solving problems, making decisions. That state is necessary for leadership and performance. But if the nervous system never shifts into parasympathetic recovery mode, your repair processes never fully activate. The system stays alert even during periods where it should be restoring itself. And this is exactly why deliberate downshifting matters. Things like evening walks, breathing practices, time away from screens, that's a huge one. You need moments during the day where the nervous system exits constant stimulation. These signals teach the body when it's safe to recover. And when the nervous system learns to shift gears again, sleep deepens, recovery accelerates. Finally, hormonal signaling. Hormones are often the area that people try and fix first. Testosterone, thyroid, cortisol. But hormones are all downstream of the systems we've already been discussing. When mitochondria produce energy efficiently, when metabolism stabilizes, when sleep improves, and the nervous system regulates stress appropriately, hormone signaling often improves naturally. This is one of the reasons superficial lab interpretations can completely miss the real issue. A hormone may appear normal on paper, but if the systems that regulate that hormone are unstable, the person still feels exhausted. This is exactly why the framework I use with my clients, the ASSESS method, begins upstream. We look at mitochondrial function, metabolic stability, nervous system readiness, circadian rhythm. Only after these systems are evaluated do we analyze hormonal signals. Because when the upstream systems improve, hormones, well, they often follow. And when the hierarchy is rebuilt, something interesting happens. Recovery comes back online. You finish demanding weeks and bounce back faster. Workouts produce strength instead of lingering fatigue. Travel stops wiping out several days of energy. The system becomes resilient again. And that's the ultimate goal. Not just pushing harder, but rebuilding the physiological capacity that allows high performance to continue for decades. Because the truth is this, your drive hasn't declined. Your discipline hasn't declined. What has changed is the biological infrastructure supporting that drive. And once you rebuild that infrastructure, performance becomes sustainable again. If this is the pattern that you've been dealing with, the 30-day Executive Energy Reset Blueprint walks through the exact sequence for restoring these systems. The link's in the description. Check it out, because high performance should not require running yourself into the ground. And remember this one last thing. You don't tolerate mediocrity in your business. Don't tolerate it in your biology. I'll see you all very soon. Take care.